In the first lecture, I noted that when Theseus found his way out of the labyrinth, he set sail, and after abandoning good Ariadne on the island of Naxos, he returned to the Greek mainland and decoded the labyrinthine maze through the crane's dance. Now, in those dance steps, he performed a series of movements that would guide others out of the labyrinth. There's something of a parallel between Theseus's dance of the cranes and, as I noted, the dance of the bees that locates the flowers with the greatest amount of nectar. Dance figures importantly in the classical literature, in Homer, in Ovid, in other classical writers. It has been noted by more than one cultural historian, Yale's Eric Havelock is the one that comes to mind in this connection, that pre-literate societies, having limited resources with which to set down, as it were, what is worth knowing, routinely employ the dance for such purposes. Through certain dance steps, which can be rehearsed and repeated and learned by others, one can symbolize events of great moment, not only symbolize them, but lay them out in a definite and choreographed order, reflecting time and space. So to some extent, the earliest cultural memories of a community are recorded, coded as it were, choreographically, as it were, inscribed in movement. This can be greatly enriched by having the dance accompanied by a chorus. Consider the expressive power of modern ballet and opera, and imagine the content repeated regularly and connected to matters of profound importance to oneself and one's community. Add to the metric and melodic character of the music lyrics of heroism, pathos, tragedy. Here are the ingredients of pre-literate history, pre-literate moral thought, performed to teach and to remind and to allow those witnessing the event to go home at the end of all this and recognize what kind of people they are, what they stand for, what their obligations are. Now, out of this background, something quite precious and productive develops. The chorus breaks up, and there are actual participants whose activities now are commented on by, or otherwise illuminated by, a group providing a gloss on the activity. The chorus sings a commentary, but the participants themselves are engaged in one or another kind of drama designed to teach a lesson or present possibilities otherwise unforeseen, or remind people of events that must always be kept in mind if the polis is to be preserved, if the tribe is to be kept intact. What we have here is the foundation of drama itself, whether it is ever to be recorded in written form. In the classical world, the dramas are composed and performed not only in a society that is literate, but a society that has an exquisitely precise and supple language. Out of the developed drama comes what? The dialogue. That is, out of this dramatic enactment, we now can find a much smaller ensemble of participants who address frontally questions that the drama is otherwise about, but that the drama itself cannot resolve. The drama presents possibilities, and it's in a later development, in a later and more philosophical or intellectual development, that out of the possibilities of the dramatic is carved a dialogue for the purpose of dispute, analysis, evaluation. It might be said, then, that philosophy arises from cultural resources that begin in a pre-literate world possessed of choreography and painting and certain natural movements and natural language by way of which one can communicate thoughts and feelings. Then to this world of the dance and the painting, this world of murals and body postures and signs and symbols, is added a chorus, a lyric, a story to be told, an epic poem, the benefit of minstrels singing away memorably with tunes that one remembers all the way back to one's tenths. Out of this, through the imagination, the fertile genius of the literary mind, whole stories are spun in rich dramatic form. And out of this same set of dramatic possibilities, but only rarely, arises nothing less than philosophical disquisitions on the path toward authentic and critical philosophy in the form of dialogue. From the dance of Theseus to the dialogues of Plato, we are witnesses to thought refining itself. I wish to dilate on the dramatic form first, because the dramatists not only appear on the eve of Socratic philosophy, but even predate Socratic philosophy. More than this, the drama envisages possibilities in ways that are vivid and deeply suggestive, often connecting to actual life with an immediacy missing in formal philosophical discourse. Problems are not clarified or resolved the way they are in philosophy, but a kind of philosophical challenge is set down once we learn how the lives of the characters are being lived within the drama itself. It is surely not accidental that the dialogues composed by Plato have a dramatic form. Indeed, were Plato not acknowledged to be among the greatest philosophers, he might well be included among the leading dramatists of the ancient world. The great depth psychologists, principally Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung, were no strangers to the ancient Greek tragedians and saw them as penetrating to levels of psychological understanding deeper than that reached by psychiatry itself. So a few words then on how the human condition was understood by the dramatists. Let's begin with this question. Is Medea a murderess? Is she a murderess in just the sense that would be meant today by a prosecutor in possession of the same facts? Now, Medea, dramatically represented in theaters all over the world and in scores of languages, audiences have no doubt but that she kills her sons. She's forlorn, she's enraged, she's been abandoned by Jason, whose faithlessness was to improve his own situation in the world. He has taken up with another woman, the daughter of King Creon. We're going to meet Creon again as he admonishes a very different sort of woman, Antigone. But here's Medea, who has been the victim of an act of treason against her own love. She seeks a form of revenge proportioned to the offense. What will cause in Jason the unrelieved pain and grief he has caused her? Even in this rage, even in what might be regarded as a kind of madness, we see an attempt to find a proportionality, to find something fitting and meet. Even in the act of what we would take to be a violent and unnatural crime, there is something that tries to match up with the depth of feeling, the depth of resentment that is experienced by this jilted lover. Now, when Euripides gives us Medea and Jason, he is knowingly controversial in his own time, because he does not offer heroic figures. His are all too human, possessing but few redeeming qualities. Oh yes, Jason and the Argonauts engaged in all sorts of daunting tasks to get the golden fleece, but Medea's help was there at many turns. When they escaped together to Corinth, Jason would sire 2 sons with her, only then to turn around, marry the daughter of the king of Corinth, and shamelessly assure Medea that he did this with her interests in mind. One does get the sense that in all this, including the demanded search for the golden fleece, Jason has been prompted by what I'm prepared to call middle-class values. I mean, they're off to get the golden fleece. Here is an opportunistic fellow, moved around by his own passions rather too easily. Could make the evening news. Meanwhile, we have Medea, and what we know about Medea is that service to Jason was in the form of sorcery. She is daughter of a nymph witch and has practiced in the arts of magic, a figure surrounded in mystery. There's something about her that is at the subterranean level. She is redolent of a religion in a Greek world that predates Olympianism. It is the chthonic earth religions, the religions devoted to deities judged as controlling birth and renewal, agriculture, husbandry, crops, fertility. The Olympians came to replace the chthonic gods. But in this earlier form of devotion, pride of place was held by women because of their procreative power, their life-giving power. Life then was identified centrally with womankind, not at the practical level of political or economic life, but at the most primitive level, which is the level at which Medea's creative and destructive energies reside. I might digress here to mention another interesting event in Greek literary and legendary history. Avenging the sacrificing of their daughter, Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon when he returns from the Trojan War. Their son, Orestes, now avenges his father's death by killing his mother, a faithless wife. And this sets the stage for a trial that leads to a hung jury. They can't decide between the crime of Orestes killing his mother and the crime of Clytemnestra killing Agamemnon. And who is to cast the deciding vote? It is to be cast by a woman. Not just any woman, of course, but by Athena. And her vote favors Orestes, because the crime of killing the man ranks higher in negativity than the crime of killing the woman. And you begin to see the patriarchal perspective replacing that older, chthonic, matriarchal outlook. Well, enough of that. Now, Medea hearkens to an older perspective, so different from our own that she seems to us and to Euripides' audiences as simply mad. Indeed, when Medea is played right, she herself is less aware of precisely what she's doing than too many actresses are inclined to make her seem. She should be more driven than driving. There should be something of the mystery of earth itself that impels her movements, that will have her sacrifice her sons to return them to the earth, to revive the cycle and have it worked out in a better way next time round. I did scratch out just a couple of lines where she is explaining herself as she kisses the children she is about to kill. It is one of the poignant moments in the history of theater. "Go," she says, "leave me." She wants them to disappear back into the fundament of things. "Leave me. I cannot bear to see you any longer. That is, your presence in my senses is defiling, but not because of anything you've done. It's because of something I've done. I gave birth to you as a result of love for a traitor." Overcome by grief, "Now I understand what I am about to do," she says. "Passion, that cause of our most dire woes, has vanquished my rational power." Plato might just as well have been sitting in the audience taking notes. Here we go again, from that rage that launches Homer's Iliad to Medea's passion. Passion does it all. The movements are to be understood in that chthonic sense of something driving us, we know not what. We call it passion, but what Medea is about to do has the character of the involuntary, the akousios in the ancient Greek, not unlike a gripping addiction or seizure. Is she a murderess then, or are these motives irresistible? Euripides develops characters now more accessible than the Olympians. The mysterious and powerful but jilted woman, cheated by her opportunistic and aggressive husband, who finds honor chiefly in externals. Medea's impulses spring from beneath the earth, his from what is above it. Perhaps because this is a rather modern saga that many of Euripides' contemporary critics thought it was, because of that, thought it was uninstructive. It wasn't accomplishing what they regarded as the very mission of theater. Not to depict the sorts of entities we are, but to show us how our good character leads to good ends. But Euripides knew what he was doing, and Euripides knew in his day that this tension now was a real one, this tension between the chthonic and the Olympian, this tension between our origins and our ideals, our humanity and that perfectionist scheme believed to obtain among the Olympians. Alas, know thyself. What we do find in Euripides in nearly all and in nearly all the Greek dramatists is this central canon, that at the end of the day, character is destiny. This is clear in Homer, of course. Once you can peg the type of character on display, all the rest seems to fall in place. No one is surprised when finally Agamemnon stands up during that brief period of rapprochement with Achilles and says of their previous and angry encounter, "Oh, look, you know that day I didn't really do it. It was the Erinyes that take you over and the gods make you do things," etc., etc. There's something so true to character in Agamemnon taking that particular way out. There's something so characteristic of Helen of Troy in Iliad and Odyssey when, on the few occasions when we meet her, she never utters a sentence in which she does not refer to herself, or of the faithfulness of Penelope, the valor of Patroclus, etc., etc. The dramatists are attempting to work out something else. There is a dangerous conflict brewing between the ageless customary practices of the Greek-speaking people and this new philosophical thought that is producing new insights and discoveries. The word nomos is pivotal here. As understood in the developed vocabulary of the ancient philosopher, nomos is not what is merely customary, but what is lawful, as in the very laws of nature. And in this same developed age, within the context of law and society, nomos again is not merely the customary practices, but what is utterly binding as a legal precept. How are we to understand the law? Is the law something naturally right? Is it something imposed? Does it arise from our very nature? Is it counter to our nature? Now, the dramatists play this out at the level of fiction, but fiction that is often more real than reality itself. What we find in Medea is someone behaving unnaturally. Mothers do not kill their sons, even when they are married to faithless husbands. She's doing the most unnatural of things, a mother killing her own offspring. Nonetheless, she is doing something that is intelligible, because she's driven by passion. Well, if driven by passion, then is the act the natural sort of thing? When she says herself that direst consequences ensue when reason is trumped by passion, is this a rational reflection on her part? Isn't that precisely the point where she could stop herself? No, precisely not. To be driven by passion is to have passion rule reason, if, even as a kind of parallel development, you know better, as when a chorus reflects on the actions of a play's principal characters. You recognize that what you are doing is beyond reason. Nonetheless, you are beyond reason, and no private narrative to that effect stops the action from taking place. So here we find in Medea one of the famous women of the ancient Greek world. And note how many of the really commanding figures in that ancient Greek world are women. Aphrodite, and Athena, and Medea, and Antigone, Andromache as brave Hector's wife, the Theban women, Clytemnestra, Penelope. The list is long and revealing. It's very similar to what we will find in Shakespeare later on. That is to say, it's difficult to find a bona fide male hero in Shakespeare, certainly any hero of Homeric proportions. One might want to think about that a bit. The heroic figures tend to be women in Shakespeare, the self-sacrificing, committed, stolid characters. Not with Hamletian indecision does Lady Macbeth proceed with the business at hand. There is also a greatness in Homeric women, and a greatness in the women of the ancient Greek dramatists. It's worth noting this because of the position women actually occupied in the ancient world, and particularly the ancient Athenian world, which is a position of reclusive subservience. But this, I think, should be understood more in cultural terms than what are finely and validly psychological terms. It is more a recognition of the power of eros, the ancient understanding that what it is that brings man and woman together is not just a creative force. It's not just something that brings life about and repopulates the world. It is also a powerfully destructive force. Because what we will do in the name of eros, what we will do at the bidding of eros, is what Medea does. This recognition of the power of eros has more to do with the relative standing, the actual relative standing of women in the ancient Greek world, than some theory like Aristotle's, according to which women are incomplete men, closer to children than to male adulthood. That's philosopher's talk. But I don't think in that talk Aristotle is recovering the thought of his age. And he is certainly not recovering the thought of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. Well, there is another woman that warrants attention, and that is Antigone, as presented to us by Sophocles. Antigone finds that her brother, Polynices, has been killed. His body is left out in the open for the dogs and wolves to devour. King Creon of Corinth has ordered that no one shall touch this body, let alone bury it, Creon taking him to be a mere traitor. Creon, you know, is the chap whose daughter Jason takes up with, a fact that is not irrelevant. So there's Creon. Don't touch the body. Antigone sits with her sister and says, we've got to do something about this. That's Polynices out there. He must be given a proper burial. Her fearful sister will have none of it. Don't do it, Antigone. But utterly undissuaded, Antigone proceeds to do what she is compelled by conscience to do. Now brought before the king, she is queried harshly by Creon. Sort of a, don't you know who I am, and by what right do you disobey, that kind of interrogation. What his questions express is the ageless maxim according to which the will of the prince is the law of the land, one sense of nomos. How in this context is the law, nomos, to be understood? Now what Antigone replies in so many words is that the law that requires a sister to bury the body of a dead brother is more ancient than kings. It's a universal precept. It's not just customary. Some might insist that Antigone's defense includes the recognition that such has always been the case. But that is not what the Greek says. What the Greek says is that what she is doing is universal, that she is impelled by something universal. Antigone is serving up, by way of Sophocles' play, a version of what today might be called natural law theory. That is, that there is something in us, something at an intuitive but reachable level, that tells us the course of action that is right for beings like ourselves. When, many centuries later, Thomas Aquinas will say, if our nature were different, our duties would be different, he's recording the same insight that we find in Sophocles' Antigone. It is in my very nature, do you see, that I must do this. She might just as well have said to him, and every ancient Greek watching this play would know that she is saying as much, quote, if there would be kings, we must have the unreflecting capacity for the kind of allegiance that I am now showing toward my dead brother. That is, what impels me to do in his behalf what I'm doing is exactly what you would have to rely on for there to be kings at all. Now, I find the contrast or the comparison between Medea and Antigone quite interesting. Antigone is, of course, a woman of passion. There is no question about it. She loves deeply and reverentially. She is a woman of fear. She doesn't want to be locked up behind stone by this ruthless king. In the 11th hour, however, what she responds to is the summons of her nature. Just as Medea, in the most forlorn of terms, is lamenting the fact that passion prevents her from matching up with the summons of her nature. In the one case, we have Euripides giving us a form of madness, which is the madness that overtakes us when we surrender reason to passion. And in Antigone, Sophocles is giving us a woman who recognizes who she is. She has answered the command, know thyself. And she understands herself to be constituted in such a way that what she does must be done. It must be done whatever kings might say. Ideally, kings encourage us to do and command us to do what the best of our natures would have us do in any case. But when they don't, ultimate authority is retained by the light of conscience and not by the holder of the scepter. When Antigone comes to define, when Aristotle comes to define tragedy, he will say that tragedy is when bad things happen to good people. In his characteristically Aristotelian way, he would reject the notion that there is anything tragic about bad things befalling those who deserve it. It's entirely just when bad things happen to bad people. But there's something awful about bad things happening to good people. Nonetheless, terrible things do happen to the good, the brave, the innocent. The question that has to arise in the ancient mind, as it arises in the contemporary mind, is this: if there is a providential and all-seeing God who loves us, how do we account for the presence of evil in the world? The ancient Greek dramatists wrestled with just this question, but with no acceptance of an all-good and all-loving God. For them it was clear enough that one may honor the gods, perform sacrifices, be reverential, shun hubris. You can do all this and more, and nonetheless come to endure what is dreadful. It falls to the philosophers, then, to pick up the baton and carry the race for insight and understanding a bit further down the track, toward the finish line, which is still not visible. But the promise is that with sure steps and a disciplined mode of approach, progress will exceed anything gained by mere literature. Surely it was one of the presumptions of the philosophical mind that it was capable of going beyond what mere literature might produce. Audiences of both great ancient theater and great ancient philosophy will make that choice for themselves. Does philosophy get us further down the track than did Euripides? Perhaps.